So welcome everyone. Thank you for finding us. This evening I am joined by Ben Appel, who some of you will have read some of his work. I'll link to his site in the description and you can read more if you haven't read already. Welcome, Ben. Do you want to give everyone just a few lines explaining who you are and kind of, a little bit about you?
Sure, thanks for having me. It's actually Appel, Ben Appel, which is fine. Most people.
I had that whole conversation with someone earlier and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure what to ask, sorry.
No, there you go. So I'm a writer. I live in New York. I have, I was a hairstylist in a past life. And before, so I, got involved with some gay rights activism in Maryland, where I grew up. For marriage equality, I was kind of peripherally involved, I would say. And after that initiative was successful in 2012, I did a little bit of campaigning for trans rights legislation, anti-discrimination law in Maryland, and those experiences really inspired me to go back to school and to get an education, to become a writer, and what I endeavored to be, which was a human rights activist and a journalist. And so I moved up to New York with my husband so I could attend Columbia, and I studied writing there at Columbia, and that was where I really encountered what I wouldn't have been able to put in words at the time, which was this kind of new gender ideology, but also I encountered maybe the birthplace, or where all of these ideas were kind of gestating. And I saw how they were affecting discourse, and how they, all of these kind of post-structuralist and queer theory ideas were taken there as kind of axiom and axiomatic, and were being disseminated really on social media. And I really started to see that there was really no difference between a Twitter feed and what was occurring in a lot of the classrooms, or at least just the culture there. So it really woke me up. And it was quite an identity crisis for me while I was there, intellectually and everything. And so I became, I was a full-fledged supporter of the LGBT or LGBTQ plus, movement. I was a HuffPost reader and poster of angry diatribes on Facebook. And then when I thankfully didn't abandon my critical thinking faculties when I went to school, and really was there to get a really good education, which I did. And I was there to really digest ideas and formulate my own kind of authentic responses to them. And while, in the process, I became sort of a heretic, for that. So I attended a graduate program after I graduated, and I lasted in that program, an MFA writing program, which is a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, Nonfiction, for a semester at another esteemed institution in the US. And I left after writing a piece actually called "The New Homophobia in Higher Education" for my Substack, and was subsequently kind of there was a diversity, equity, and inclusion, a little bit of an investigation launched there, because people in my cohort were offended by some of the things that I had written and put behind a paywall, mind you. Didn't disseminate them around the graduate department or anything. And I knew that what was awaiting me was a struggle session, and I knew that it just wasn't a welcome place for me, or a person like me, from the beginning. And so I left, and since then I've been writing, and I do have a book in the works that's scheduled for next year, that's under contract with Post Hill Press, that's tentatively titled Cis White Gay, a take on this new slur that I was introduced to
Yeah.
in my first year at university, and in an activist organization that I worked for over that first summer there. So that's where I am now.
Yeah. So to kind of talk about, if we can, in terms of kind of a bit of a context for recognizing the new homophobia and kind of the new cult. So I was brought up Catholic, and I joke about kind of being raised in a cult, but I mean, you know, it kind of is, but it's, you know, not what everyone might recognize as a cult. Obviously, you've written about kind of growing up. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a positive history of your kind of childhood in terms of the stuff that you kind of experienced that kind of you then obviously recognized and repeated later with the different kind of cult?
Sure. So yeah, so I grew up Catholic as well. I grew up in what was called a Catholic charismatic renewal community, or a covenant community. And this was a movement that really took the States by storm in the late 60s and 70s, and then into the 80s. And it's still going, it's global now. I grew up in a covenant community, of which my father was one of the male leaders. The men were called coordinators, the leaders, and the women leaders were called handmaids. And it was a covenant community in the sense that all of the families lived in the same neighborhood, you know, a couple square miles. All the kids attended the same kind of school, and the members all kind of pledged obeisance to the leaders when it came to how they, you know, dressed, what they thought, how much news they consumed, how much television they watched. And it was really a stark return to traditional, almost kind of Old Testament biblical living, with these really traditional men's and women's roles. The men were the husband masters, and the women were, you know, kind of were submissive to their husbands. And of course, there was, the main enemies of this community were, and this movement were, you know, secular humanism, feminism, Marxism, Islam, and then of course wrapped up in feminism and so on, and secular humanism and liberal values of, you know, homosexuality and gay and lesbian rights. So there was, of course, I was taught as a young kid about Sodom and Gomorrah, and about, you know, sodomy was a vocabulary word in my 6th grade Bible class. You know, AIDS was God's punishment for homosexuals, and so that was what I came up in. And the community really experienced a reckoning in the 90s, when a lot of ex-members came forward and actually contacted the Catholic Archdiocese, and there was an investigation by the Archdiocese, because this community was affiliated with the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
One of the leaders was a Catholic priest, and he was kind of a liaison between the Catholic Church and this community. And these community members came forth and said, this is a call, and these leaders, this one leader in particular, is pulling us away from actually traditional Catholic teachings, just in the sense of devotion to him rather than devotion to the Holy Church. And then, you know, there were a lot of people who left as well that weren't just kind of, I'm sure, seeing it through that lens, that were just disgruntled about being swept up in something that was oppressive. And so it was really a culture of purity policing, of groupthink. It was very Stalin-esque. You know, the leaders knew all of the secrets and vulnerabilities of the community members, and the community members were really required to kind of confess their shortcomings to their district heads, who would then pass it up to the handmaids and the coordinators, and it would kind of circulate up and down. So it was a really oppressive. It became a really oppressive community. And my mother was actually the one who had initially wanted to join it in the late 70s, when it was really just all these reformed hippies who wanted to just praise Jesus and spread the message of love and forgiveness and unconditional love, which she came up in a very strict religious Catholic, you know, not necessarily household, but was indoctrinated with really kind of a hellfire and brimstone doctrine as a kid. and she had a lot of religious guilt. So she initially found sanctuary in this community. And then when it changed and linked up with this broader movement, when I was 12, she had enough. Her marriage to my father was really, really strained, and we left the community as a family, and we were essentially excommunicated from it. So the ties were severed there. So I had my own fallout from that, which was a really dark period for a long time. And so I saw the parallels, mainly, just briefly, I saw the parallels in university when I started to actually feel a reaction that I had felt. It kind of re-triggered these impulses of extreme guilt and extreme fear and mental self-flagellation for not just maybe saying anything that was heretical, which I was afraid to do and I really wouldn't do at the beginning, but to even think against the grain when it came to hardline, radical left, queer theory based, and this new kind of brand of anti-racism, which is to me was just a kind of new neo-racism, not against just white people and Asian people, but also Black people, which seemed completely disempowering and really, I thought, was an ideology that attempted to rob Black people of their agency and autonomy and kind of paint them as perpetual victims, when I had been taught, and from my own experience, the Black people in my life and with whom I had become friends with, and my understanding, which was that they were empowered, whole human individuals capable of thinking for themselves. So I, not to be reductive, but those were some of the arguments and the nuances that I saw that no one was really allowed to say. And so it was a dark time, because it was a for my mental health, and I really struggled.
Yeah. So before your kind of your parents made the decision to kind of leave or move away, is it just looking back you kind of understand that to have been the kind of cult-like activity behaviors of the community that you were living in, or were you aware of that at the time? Was it only kind of looking back now, seeing in another setting, that kind of triggering?
That's a good question. And so it was, I actually knew from not long after we left, because so when I'm in it, I say, or I've kind of written or have thought, the real trauma from living or growing up in a cult, it doesn't really occur while you're there. It occurs after you leave it, after you're stripped out of it suddenly and placed in the real world.
Yeah.
And you're confronted with an entirely new set of or a really new understanding of reality, and you're living within a new reality. And so while I was in that community, I was essentially a pretty happy kid, because it was all I knew. And what it was, I was safe and I was forgiven. I was redeemed so long as I was in this community, and I was abiding by and obedient to my teachers, who were really kind of living proxies for God. They were, this direct line to God and God's rules, and were, in a way, how I saw it, as powerful enough to kind of be these mediums through which God could grant me redemption. Because if I would do something wrong or sinful, there would be a shaming, and rather than really a strict punishment. And so, but it after that was, so long as I was properly remorseful, there was a sense of, okay, I'm still within this, I'm still accepted, I'm still safe. Well, when you're ripped out of that and you no longer have that structure, it's kind of chaotic and frightening. And I was very gender nonconforming, extremely effeminate, and that wasn't really, I wasn't made aware of that in this community, and especially in this small school. There were 4 kids in my grade, including myself. There were about 100 kids from kindergarten to 8th grade. There was really no in crowd. We were just praising and worshiping Jesus all day, praying over each other, laying our hands on each other, crying and weeping, speaking in tongues. There was a lot of that. So it was very sensational, and zealous. And so after I left, immediately going into public school and being separated from all my friends who I had known since infancy, into this public school where there are 100 kids in my grade, or maybe 150, however many there were, hundreds in this middle school, and immediately being bullied and labeled as a faggot, being called, are you a girl or a boy? And so, months earlier, literally having been in this community, in this cult, in this bubble, learning about sodomy and what sodomy was and what defined it and why this was an important word to learn and to use from my headmaster, to being separated from that, things unraveling at home, my parents divorced, and then being thrust into this new reality where I was precisely what I had learned was really the epitome of evil, and an offense to God. And so I developed these behaviors, this severe obsessive compulsive disorder and scrupulosity, constantly repenting to God for my sins because I was convinced that I had abandoned God or I had done something wrong to deserve all of this. And I actually started drinking as a kid when I was 12, 13, even alone, to kind of deal with that distress.
It's almost like he's talking about having spoken with and obviously read about kind of detransitioners, and that kind of is this kind of similar parallels there, and a kind of there's a reluctance to leave the kind of ideology of gender identity, because if you detransition and you kind of go away from it, it's kind of stepping outside of that and you lose the bubble that you've kind of been protected by. So there's definitely parallels there. I think in terms of what it makes me think is, or the question I'm trying to think what the answer might be, although I'm going to ask you, in terms of that idea of kind of leaving a cult, thinking of the kind of LGBTQ plus kind of rainbow community of people, for anyone, particularly for gay men who are kind of going along with that, who may not have seen some of the impacts of gender ideology because it affects women more and those sorts of issues, those sorts of things. What do you think? What do you think are the kind of ways to cope or ways to break through, or for kind of? So there's two questions. One is and we can come back to this one, I guess. It's a bit more, what's it going to take to kind of get people to kind of take that step out of the cult when they may not even realize that's kind of where they're in as gay men? But then how do you cope if you do step away from, if all your friends are kind of going along with trans women and all the mantras and what they're being told to, using right pronouns or being really concerned about using the right pronouns and all of that kind of ritual that goes with it, to step away from all of that? How do you cope? Like how did you cope with being, like you say, in a new school, completely out of that safer environment you felt previously, both then and then also as a self-identified heretic later? How did you cope, and how can people cope with that?
Well, I wouldn't recommend coping the way that I did when I was 12 and 13, which was a steady path to drugs and alcohol addiction. And then, a complete mental break by the time I was 19. But later in life, encountering this new dynamic, this kind of new but similar dynamic, all of those experiences and growing from them, getting sober in my early 20s, getting mental health care and help, and growing up, and steeled me against, or against this, and what my solution became was I had to get trauma therapy, actually, for me. I mean, I was older, okay? I was in my 30s when I attended university, which was a huge blessing and a benefit because I had grown up, I had life experience, I had things to compare it to. And so young people are just so vulnerable to indoctrination. And I was thankfully immune to that in a lot of ways. So that was a huge benefit to me. That's one. Two, I went there to learn and to. I also had the ability to really remember the value and of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And measuring ideas and arguments and formulating a response to them, which in itself became heretical.
Mm-hmm.
There was no value placed on nuance.
Yeah.
So that was something that I began to see was unacceptable as well, that it was strictly this way. But I think what's really important, so anyway, I really struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine, a dear friend who had been a clinical social worker, and I got to know her in my early 20s. And from the very beginning of sharing my experiences, she said, you should try something called EMDR, which is a form of trauma therapy. I think it would be really beneficial. It has really high success rates. And so finally, I found someone in Manhattan who practiced this, and it stands for movement, desensitization, something. I can't even remember. I always forget. But it was just a form of talk therapy and psychotherapy that where simultaneously, sometimes there's eye movements that are involved, but for me it's a sensory thing where I would hold these vibrating tappers in my hand that would alternate tap 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 while at specific times when I was talking about different events. And what it was doing was, it's kind of based on this idea that when we talk about trauma, there's a part of our brain that kind of shuts down, that becomes more inactive or less active. So we might, and this was it made sense to me because I could have articulated to you and told you why I am the way that I am, why I have these mental health symptoms, where I come from, back and forth, but I thought, why am I still struggling with this? Why is this still so present? And what I realized was that there is a part of the brain that becomes less active when we're talking about this, and we're essentially not processing these things. We're kind of remaining stuck in it. Mm-hmm. And so the endeavor was to become unstuck. And so while stimulating this part of the brain while I'm talking about this, I was able to further process this. And while I was hyper focused on one specific event or topic, it was able to kind of slowly broaden, and I was able to form a bigger and broader and more logical narrative, and just reevaluate all these things from a more objective or safer standpoint. So that was something that I did for a year, which really helped.
Yeah.
But going back to your question, I think that what's really important is not just to like how to cope, but actually to really understand like what we're encountering. Mm-hmm. So the sharp divide between people who are taking their sets of ideas and beliefs based on kind of a queer theoretical post-structuralist Foucauldian like viewpoint versus people who might not ascribe to that. Mm-hmm. And there's a tension there, and it's kind of irreconcilable in a lot of ways. And so, we're talking about what we're encountering. Like, that was really important for me to understand and to still understand and to still wrap my head around. Like, I have to encounter these ideas and study them and look like, what do these folks actually believe? Like, what are these ideas based on? Like, rather than saying homosexuality, homogendered, or and people transgressing the boundaries of sex and saying sex is a spectrum, or this is really just a construct. Like, how did people get here? And how did people just abandon? And really, what so much of what the core of this activism is, it's embroiled in kind of a leftist Marxist worldview, which is this intention to really undermine Western liberalism and the West, in the context that the West is inherently patriarchal and white supremacist and cis heteronormative and oppressive, and that if we transgress the boundaries, like that these constructs, these definitions and identities that are formed, that we occupy, so like gay and lesbian rights and all of these kind of hallmarks of Western liberalism, that the way that we formulated this Enlightenment thinking of egalitarianism and liberalism is reserved only for a specific set of people. And so if we transgress boundaries and redefine or challenge the boundaries, so there is no such thing as just a man or a woman, or you know, this kind of idea that, oh, we're labeled these things and we're put in these categories to oppress us, or to it's a state sponsored and state controlled value system. And so it really kind of does come down to, I think, like, okay, do you kind of support Western liberalism and Enlightenment thinking or values, or are you do you support kind of this Marxist ideology and this kind of post-structuralist way of thinking about things?
Do you think, or from the people you kind of encountered, either other students on campus that you've written about, and also the interns that you were working with at the kind of LGBT rights kind of organizations, who demonstrated some of this and kind of how they were, how much are they understanding where, like, why they're doing that, and how much is going along with it, and how much is kind of understanding it and trying to go along with it, and kind of where,
I think
what variation of kind of those sorts of, you know, how taken along with it are some of those people, and how much are they actively knowing why they're doing it?
I think they're fully on board, and I think that they kind of understand or know why. And I think that when I go back to, like, oh, young people are really vulnerable to indoctrination, because it really, and not to be, I don't know, it's so funny how, but it really is a form of indoctrination. So these theories, which are theories or are lenses through which we can evaluate things and study history and epistemologies and so forth, are taken as axiomatic. So this is like, so there is and it's super easy to, and I mean, I suppose that in a lot of ways this is true for Western liberalism or ideals too, but it's super easy to distill or reduce these theories down to really attractive and sexy sound bites. You know, trans women or women, or I don't know, abolish the police, or you know, and because to deny them or to challenge them, it's like, oh, well, you're a fucking racist or you're a transphobe, you know. So it's like, it's so crafty and clever to make them so it's really a fundamentalist movement. And so, you know, I think they're fully on board, but I don't think that they realize what's at stake.
Right.
And they have no concept of, well, maybe some of them do, but I think a lot of people don't have a concept of what the burning down of Western institutions would mean on a global scale.
Yeah.
And or what the alternative is, or how some of the things that they're arguing for are in line with oppressive regimes, or even more patriarchal, strictly patriarchal, and very patriarchal nations or nation states and regimes. So it's like, you know, to distress over these, to really want to dismantle our concept of reality. You know, Colin Wright, who writes, you know, Reality's Last Stand, he's the biologist that kind of really challenges a lot of this stuff. When he writes about, when he called his Substack like Reality's Last Stand, and he's just like, I just feel like this is really the last step. If this goes down, this concept of like this idea that we've understood about mammals and about humans, this, that we're sexually dimorphic species, and that if we abandon biology and findings, this kind of goal towards a shared truth, and findings based on the scientific method, then we're really lost. You know,
interesting. The
and so there's this divide between what they're going with these people on the left, the left, or these progressive or whomever, this utopian ideal. If we break down these structures, then suddenly everyone will be liberated. Whereas it's like for people who know history and understand a lot of this, that lying on the other side of that is not liberation, but extreme oppression. And violence, and nihilism, and a breakdown of society.
I think it's interesting they're not looking at the consequences, the kind of the whole be kind, and the whole, whether it's as peripheral as that, or whether it's the kind of knowing some of the kind of where the theories come from and kind of enacting some of that, but that kind of breaking down of boundaries, blurring of boundaries, the queering of everything, as a you know, almost superficial level, I guess. It's that's kind of where they're at. It's interesting to think is that they're not thinking beyond that, and actually it's the consequences of all of that that's kind of going to be the real impact.
You know, Judith Butler recently, I don't even know where this was from, but recently in regards to, I believe this was in regards to the conflict in Ukraine, and she's saying, oh, how wonderful would it be if just all of these soldiers laid down their weapons and just committed to love and loving one another. And I know that this is wishful thinking, but she said something about how there has to be this remaining endeavor to commit to the unrealistic, or to, it was so, however she said it or wrote it or whatever, it and I have to find this, it so encapsulated this ideology. And you know, she is essentially the kind of godmother of this theory, or one of. And it's so detached from reality.
I was going to say that's exactly the phrase I've kind of was thinking and I've used and talked about. It's that detachment from reality that's like, we can all wish things in the world could be better and hope for stuff, or aim towards stuff that may not actually be achievable, but it's the direction we're going. But it's that complete detachment from the reality of what's actually A, possible, or B, like just the basic foundational rules about how the universe works, you're working within. I think that's for those who haven't, I've read a fair amount on kind of postmodernist theory and the stuff that's come out of that. So, but you know, if that's what people are interested in, I definitely recommend reading some of that, because the whole, this works in an academic, abstract kind of setting. That's the point of it. Applying it into activism is then where it's like, well, that's just not going to work. I think that's where a lot of the conversation is kind of where that's not going to work, or the debate around that is I think it's definitely something around the laying out more about what the longer term implications are for some of these things. I think
it's a big FU to pragmatism. I mean, it's just so anti-pragmatic. It's like the antithesis of it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that related to that, actually, you interned with kind of LGBT. What was the organization? Sorry, again,
I don't even want to say, to be honest.
That's
I mean,
right.
that's how.
Yeah, no.
That's how the attitudes
I was
are
going to say
here, and how much power. It's like I would love to just be able to, but I that's how distrusting I am of this the power that they really do hold.
I was going to say it's kind of those sorts of organizations that in the UK, Stonewall's obviously our largest organization. There's a few others kind of similar, not as big, but going along with it. But the that kind of thinking about the kind of pragmatism for those sorts of organizations, how, or I guess in your experience of being there and experiencing this more widely in America, those organizations, to be that type of organization traditionally, to be impactful, you have to be pragmatic. That was Stonewall's strength. They were very kind of business-like. It wasn't rainbows and unicorns. It was black and white and red, and taken seriously by government, based, making recommendations based on research with practical applications of what things meant. They weren't just we're raising awareness and trying to be nice and fluffy type charity. So in the time you spent with those sorts of organizations or awareness of them, is that gone entirely? The kind of, how can you be effective as a kind of lobbying charitable organization if you have no foundation in pragmatism?
So there's two things. So one, I think that the main tactic is to shut down any dissent. That is the tactic. It's to shut down into silence.
Yeah.
There's no room for nuance. There's no room for argument. And there's this complete trust in whatever way the wind is blowing towards this new idea of what LGBTQ plus liberation is.
Yeah.
So it's where the money is. It's who's dominating the conversation. There was a recent article in a recent very popular financial magazine with an interview of a very prominent leader in the US. And she said that, one, she talks to and meets with corporations to help them understand how to reach young Gen Z folks. So if you want to call it woke, it's this woke capitalism. This is all intrinsically bound up in capitalism, which is the most maddening thing about it, because label yourself queer now is to essentially say I'm anti-capitalist, when what you are part of is this intrinsically capitalist movement. And so that's really, honestly, one of the most maddening things about it. So it's about talking with companies and establishing ways for them to monetize this. And two, it's about, she said, listening to the Gen Z people and the young people and letting them, in a way, take the lead and take the reign.
Yeah.
So if you're letting Gen Z folks and these people take the reign, you're letting indoctrinated, very immature, very fragile, very coddled, very misinformed, and we're talking about disinformed young people, indoctrinated by this. Honestly, it's a neo-colonialist, it's a new colonization of the mind by academics who are indoctrinating young people and then sending them out to do the dirty work.
Yeah.
And to hurt themselves in the process. That's what the tactic is.
Yeah.
Within those organizations, there are probably folks that are really trying to help people. But they are much fewer and farther between. And I think that something that I think about a lot is and I think about this in my own respect, and this is why I'm averse to activism, to be honest, because I think that a lot of people use their activism to validate their own identities and their own vulnerabilities and their own often tenuous identities that are very fragile, and that, you know, if your intention is to silence any dissent, you're just showing that any kind of valid argument is just going to make yours completely crumble and fall apart.
Yeah.
And all of the cards are just going to fall. You know, you're basing your movement on a house of cards. And so that's what I get, what I have to think about. Like, how much of my own limited subjective experience is I always have to check myself. Like, in terms of how much of my own experience is, you know, fueling how I feel about something rather than what I think about something.
Yeah.
And so I have to be like really careful to really evaluate things on their own turn, like what people are actually saying and what's actually going on. And I guess that's why I wanted to point out like what we're really talking about here, because, you know, it just, there's a huge conversation to be had about that stuff. And
yeah, I think it strikes me the for anyone who's kind of in the going along with it, kind of whether they're working for one of these sorts of organizations or they're just, you know, they support the team and they do the right thing, but particularly for gay men as a group who have been less affected than lesbians and women in general by gender identity ideology. I think that's kind of a key thing that or a routine to kind of try and reach them that any of us could take is what happens if you ask questions? Like, are you allowed to ask questions about what you're being told? Like, because I think that's kind of the telling sign, or one of the telling signs is kind of are you allowed to have your own opinion, or even ask why something is the way it is? Like, if you're going to question the in a situation where they're trying to shut down any debate and prevent that, and you're just kind of going along with, like you say, because if they have to kind of explain stuff, it unravels and the house of cards falls down.
I mean, you know, so I just said to you I was scared to state who I was talking about or what organization I was talking about. Maybe I should have the guts to do that, you know. Consequences be damned, I don't know. I do think that people can question it. I do, and I do not blame, because again, I'm one of them, I get the fear. I do not blame anyone that remains anonymous or that just keeps their thoughts to themselves, because it's terribly frightening. But at the same time, I do find myself sometimes getting frustrated, because, you know, like, since my Newsweek article came out or whatever, like a pull-up piece I wrote last year about this kind of stuff, people saying, oh, I support, you know, thank you so much for saying this. I wish I could say these things. I'm an academic, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm in these situations, I wish I could. Or people on Twitter and so on who remain anonymous, and I completely understand it. But I think, well, I don't know, if you happen to maybe just say this, on the other end of being a heretic or being pushed out of things, it's extremely frightening. But on the other end of it is the greatest liberation. It's a spiritual liberation, it's a mental liberation, it's an intellectual liberation. What doesn't kill you does make you stronger. And I was suicidal within those spaces where I was suppressing and stuffing all of my ideas and feelings down. And when I say suicidal, I mean genuinely suicidal at university. So that is the camp, is where that's the distress, is pressing it down. That's depressing, and that is defeatist. And so letting that out, consequences be damned. I mean, even like I said this, like they tweeted this the other night, but like, and I do not have a huge follower, I mean, but I've gained some more followers on Twitter or whatever. And I said, like, there's this familiar fear of, what if I say something wrong or piss somebody off or this or that? Because my game is essentially nuance and really just kind of always trying to think rather than becoming dogmatic in a new way. You know, I do not want to do that. That's not my intention. I want to not have like, I don't want to be, you know, just remove myself from the idea of having convictions, but I don't want to just be, you know, surrender to a new kind of dogmatism, whatever that new dogmatism would look like. And so I fear, you know, I think like I'm going to probably say something at one time or another that's going to maybe anger or get, or to at least arouse some kind of dissent or against everyone in one shape or form, because I'm just myself. And I can also, like, you know, it doesn't mean just by interrogating or asking questions or saying something is saying this is the way I think and this is it. It's just like we have to be able to talk about these things. So that's what I'm for. You know, like Ross Douthat, who is the writer of the New York Times, who you know responded to this tweet. He's a conservative writer. He responded to this tweet by saying something like, you know, men, you know, by illegalizing abortion, that, you know, you are, you know, lowering the chance of finding a partner, like saying all of this stuff as woman was writing it. And then Ross Douthat said, one way to, he's like, interesting thought is that men have, employment for men has gone down, less men are married now, less men are procreating, etc. Which behind his argument could have very well been, and that's why I don't support abortion. I mean, perhaps he is a pro-life individual, I have no idea. But it became a Twitter trend, and there were people like, you know, saying, oh, opinion writers should have term limits and and just this, it was like, you know, and I'm sure there were nuanced responses like, oh, okay, that's an interesting thought. But it was like, for someone to just state a counter argument or even introduce an idea that's based on statistics, it's not safe in any capacity.
There's no point in replacing one dogma with another. I've definitely I mean, I don't have many more Twitter followers than you. Get yourself arrested, you'll get a lot more followers then. That's got a load of new followers.
Okay, there you
go. But yeah, I've definitely pissed off radfems and other individuals when I've asked a question or said a thing or disagreed, or what really, and I've stopped replying to a lot of stuff in recent months. I mean, sometimes it's obvious it's just trolls, but then when it's you've decided what that tweet said, you've not actually read what I've tweeted and then responded or even checked, am I reading you right? It's I've assumed what your position is based on broadly what you're tweeting about, and I have a different view and I'm going to talk about that. And then it gets into a whole, you know, do you even have the right to ask the question and the whole that. So yeah, there's definitely a
well, an emotional response. An emotional response just betrays the fact that you don't have a good counter argument, or you don't yet have one. You might very well have a good one. So the more fruitful response, if you are a pro-choice individual, to say, oh, interesting thought, Ross, let's take a look at that, or I hadn't thought about it that way, and to have a measured response rather than an emotional one, because all that indicates to any person is that, oh, he must have really struck a chord, because what's he saying there? And it's profoundly injurious to a movement. So
yeah, it's kind of an absolute, almost an absolutism. I think I've talked about before, tweeted about the kind of you're you might be talking about one thing, but then you're assuming that that's the only thing, or it's an all or nothing debate, which you A, can't do on Twitter, but B, isn't that the reality of either? Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying on the Dark Horse talk about welcome to complex systems. Like, all of the things that we're talking about sit in an ecosystem of humanity, and there's a lot of complexity. You're not going to be able to cover that in a couple of tweets. But then there's also a not wanting to, it seems, from some places, and that could be driven by there's something they're really passionate about, and that's their focus. But then equally, given what we were talking about earlier with the detachment from reality and this kind of new kind of generation being churned out of kind of woke farms of university into organizations, if that's the world we're kind of then dealing with, it's even more important that we hold on to being able to be nuanced and look at that. Otherwise, it's just everything's just going to be a mantra and an extreme, and then frustrating. What was I going to ask you about then? I've been scribbling notes as you've been saying stuff, because there's lots of things that kind of I've thought about. The kind of bringing it back to kind of LGBT and LGBT and the kind of the idea of the kind of the cis gay male is kind of the almost establishment now. It's not different enough, or the wrong kind of gay and that kind of stuff. What's been your kind of experience of that? But then also of that kind of LGBTQ sector, and kind of where cis gay men are sitting within that in America, particularly.
Yeah. So I learned what cisgender meant probably 5 years ago. I didn't know, and I've said this before. These young folks, queer folks in these organizations or whoever, would call me cis in precisely the same way that the seventh graders would call me fag.
Yeah.
And what was so unnerving about that was that I wrote a piece, actually, an essay for Columbia's literary magazine called "How to Be Cisgender," and it was in 2017 or 2018 or whatever, and it was just about like my obsession with My Little Ponies as a kid, and my experience with gender nonconformity, and how I defeminized myself as a kid in this new middle school as a survival tactic to thwart these bullies, and also what they represented, which is proof that I was this intrinsically evil, destined for hell, spawn of Satan, essentially. You know what I mean? Like, so I that was my project, was to, I changed the way I walked. I cut my hair. I started listening to different music. No more Mariah Carey and more Metallica. You know what I mean? I lowered my voice. I was so atrophied, like naturally, just in terms, because I was so afraid. And this was right as I'm hitting puberty and then into puberty. Now, as I got a little bit older, puberty kind of just leveled things out. Then as I got a little bit older into my teens, and I found some close girlfriends, and I felt more comfortable being myself. And then of course I came out, and then in my early 20s, and then I get sober, and I'm kind of like acquainting myself with all of that femininity that I had stuffed down, or that I had eradicated from myself as a survival tactic. So, it was liberating to listen to all of the music that I liked, and to carry myself, to go get manicures and pedicures, and to just kind of play with the boundaries of gender norms. But then that kind of got like old eventually, because I just, grew up and became this person that was like, well, I'm just myself, and I'm not defined by whether or not I get manicures or pedicures, or how, I'm defined by how I treat people, my relationships, my thoughts and ideas, my intellect, my spiritual life, like that's what makes me a human being and makes me an individual. And so when I first came to encounter these ideas, I thought, fuck you, the reason why I'm cisgender, as you say, or one of the reasons, is that how am I being bullied essentially for my gender conformity now? You're the same people. And besides the fact that, I'm sorry to say it, but your identities that you call queer are completely, to me, appear to be based on your haircut.
Yeah.
And you're not shaving you've refused to shave your legs.
Yeah.
Which, oh wow, groundbreaking.
Yeah.
A woman with a short haircut and furry legs. I'm floored. You've queered existence for me.
Yeah.
And these are folks that were saying, oh, I'm trans, or oh, I'm non-binary, but oh, you don't have to do anything to be trans. You don't have to take medication. Anybody can be trans. There's no rules to trans. And these are the ideas that are coming out of this LGBTQ rights organization. And these are the words that are printed on the website or in magazines and etc. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, which one is it? Because if you don't have to be or do anything to be trans, then, but it seems to me like there are a lot of people that rely on hormones for their well-being. Like, what is trans? The trans has broadened to be, I'm trans.
Yeah.
In this new iteration.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, I'm a 39-year-old man. I've been through some shit, and I have thought and read and interrogated myself and my own ideas about gender, or about my femininity, my masculinity, and my own gender journey has been a pretty damn intense one.
Yeah.
And so fuck you. I mean, like, yeah. I don't, you're killing brain cells here. You're actually making me feel stupid. You're being stupid, and you are making yourself, you are reducing this to something that is this really complex issue into this in-group, out-group.
Yeah.
And I think that that's tremendously sad. And I think that, so that was a hard one for me. Yeah. And as you can see, that aroused emotions in me, because that was a sensitive thing for me. And I thought, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with you, because one, there's this thread, this level of narcissism and self-obsession that is putrid to me. And and there's this commodification of taking on and appropriating, in a way, an identity that has been historically oppressed, or just claiming membership in a group to insert yourself in this new hierarchy of disadvantage, which through the lens of intersectionality, which has become the lens to view struggles for rights, it's inverted this. And so I know, for example, thinking of specific individuals, I knew you grew up on the Upper East Side in Manhattan and attended private schools and attend this insanely expensive liberal arts academy. And this is your way, and I believe, to include yourself as being this marginalized or victimized person.
Yeah.
And that is the new capitalism. It brings cultural cachet and actual capital, because of DEI initiatives that prioritize this young, let's say a woman who shaves her hair and calls herself trans, although she has no intention to transition.
Yeah.
And identifies as a so on. And I'm, so it's like, and I'm just a plain old basic gay
Yeah.
from the old school, an establishment gay, whatever that is. I don't know. I'm $150,000 in university debt.
Yeah.
So what do you know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm thriving, like, so that really irks me. And that's what gets me amped up, because I think it's a mess.
Yeah. And I think the idea of like the appropriation of it, like I'm not a big fan of when people talk about cultural appropriation, when it's just cultural appreciation and kind of going down that road. But in the kind of truer sense of the word appropriation, it's wearing that as it's wearing it. So the same way that women talk about, trans-identified males are wearing what they think being a woman is, I think gay men haven't understood that. Particularly the trans-identifying women who say they're gay men are wearing what they think a gay man is. But the whole kind of queer, it's, have you dyed your hair the right color? It's very superficial it's a presentation and image thing. But talking about it in a way that's, we're this kind of new cool group that's kind of different and othering ourselves by choice, whereas as gay people, but gay men particularly, because it's tended to be more obvious with gay men, the homophobia, that wasn't, you were othered not by your own choice. That we were kind of, the homophobia we faced was not because we chose to put that on ourselves or wear that as a costume. So that's kind of really that irks me as well. I think that's the thing that I wish more gay men could see. You're going along with a movement that is damaging to homosexuality, and it's riding on the back of not just the good work that previous homosexual kind of organizations have done, but riding on the back of the harm and damage that has been done by appropriating that and wanting I think talking about it as commodification of identity and that kind of a repression, that kind of point scoring on woke Olympics kind of things people have talked about, kind of who's the most oppressed group, and kind of, yeah, it's interesting to think of that as a kind of commodification of that kind of structure.
Yeah.
To wrap up, should we talk about your book?
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like it's very daytime TV. So yeah, I'm presuming we've covered some of the kind of the themes and stuff you're talking about. So yeah, so it's coming out kind of next year. What's the message, and kind of what kind of themes are you talking about? What are you hoping to reach with it?
So a lot of the things that we're talking about are the things that I'm writing about. So It is about my story. It's about growing up in this community. It's about really just my story to how I got here, because I think that stories are really powerful, and I think storytelling is really powerful. Like when I was a hairstylist for 13 years, I had relationships with people from all walks of life. And as much, activism as I like to say I did, the real activism for me was talking to people and getting to know people on an individual basis. So these are like pastoral, Christian counselors who may or may not have, seen same-sex attracted individuals, something that could be cured or whatever. Yeah. But for them getting to know me and us having these exchanges and kind of, relating to each other and finding common humanity, as uncomfortable as it could be sometimes, I think that changes minds. And so I, do have transgressive ideas when it comes to the new accepted, narrative about, identity politics and rights, and this new movement. But I think that I really want to tell my story to how I got here, because I feel like people will perhaps understand more where I'm coming from, and at the very least contend with not who I am, but with the arguments themselves. I guess the point of this book is I want it to be something for people to have to contend with. Yeah. For the academics, that are, smugly saying, oh, he doesn't, know, or they don't know, and just vomiting this academic jargon that's impenetrable, but that once you penetrate it is really very simple and really doesn't end up or mean a lot.
Yeah.
And so I want it to be something where people really have to contend with these ideas. But it is, a big part of it is about shame, and it's about, you know, coming out of this community and developing these OCD impulses to constantly be and feel repentant for who I am and what I think, and and to push down and to suppress natural inclinations or things that I really truly felt. And so I saw a lot of that. That was what was really disturbing about being at university, was I saw a lot of that in other individuals, even including people who would call themselves queer or in line with this new doctrine. I saw this anxiety and this fear in the classroom, of the fear of being able to speak or say what they really thought. And if I occasionally, when I would have the guts to speak, to see them nod or their eyes light up, but to suppress it. And I felt really sympathetic, and I felt really sad for me and for us and for them, that we're in this situation where we are developing these OCD and these anxiety behaviors that are extremely repressive. And so that is a part of it. But it's about my essentially route to becoming a free thinker and being liberated from all dogmas, wherever they may be, and evaluating things from like an intellectual and individual standpoint. And so I hope that people, once they read it, will at the very least respect that part of it, and kind of be able to see what I see, and what I think are profoundly regressive ideas and things that are really antithetical to like progressivism. If progressivism is something that pushes for equality and egalitarianism, I think that it's profoundly regressive, and I think that we're all suffering from it. I don't think it's just and so I want to be able, so in this book I want to be able to contend with difficult issues, and talk about these ideas about cultural appropriation and the appropriation of identities and so on, which is something that I'm writing about right now. So that's in a nutshell, I guess, or if you want to call that a nutshell, I don't know.
That sounds good. I look forward to reading a copy of that in due course. Is it what it makes me think actually with what you're just saying there, so both from doing these videos and in kind of where I've got to in kind of what I'm doing within the kind of gender wars, for want of a better description of it, and looking at the gay men route particularly. There's lots of groups kind of talking about women and LGBT more broadly, and I think there's a need to peak more gay men because of the sexism of which groups are making decisions and which groups within groups are making decisions. So that's kind of a driver for me. So I'm kind of thinking when you were talking there is that if only we could kind of get more gay men to make the connection that the freedom and liberation you felt personally once you come out, and you're not hiding what you think or who you are or those sorts of things, and pushing down the inclinations you were talking about there, if the sense of that you get from coming out is what you will get if you're thinking these things. And a lot of gay men, I've talked to other people about this, a lot of gay men aren't wanting to go along with some of the ideology or a lot of the ideology, but won't say anything. It's kind of if you can you'll feel so much better if you can just accept reality and kind of be out about that. In the same way. Okay, that's been really, really interesting. Really nice talking to you. Really nice to meet you. I'm actually going to be in New York in the summer, so I'm hoping to kind of arrange some kind of meetup with any kind of Twitter gays or anyone else that I'm kind of connected to on Twitter that's in New York. So I'll tweet about that as and when. But thank you for that really interesting conversation. Thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. Go and check out Ben's website and writings that I'll link to. And we'll be back for another chat soon. Thanks very much, Ben. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, James. I really appreciate it.